Hello, my name is Jason McGuire. I will be the teaching assistant for debate 5 in this module. So in this presentation, I will give an outline of the debate. I will give some background information on it. And at the end, I will give some tips maybe or some ideas that might go through to some of the points. So the title of this debate is Ireland needs to decarbonise at a minimum of 7% per year between now and 2030 to be consistent with the Paris Agreement. So in this debate, there's the two teams. So we have the proposition. They will be debating that the climate crisis is so urgent, we don't have time to lose, to stop using fossil fuels. And they'll also say, well, we can do this while also meeting other sustainable goals under the Paris Agreement. So essentially, they're saying we're running out of time, we need to act now. On the other side, we have the opposition. They're saying that these changes are pretty radical, and we need to plan them out so we don't have any unintended consequences. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of people being affected. And looking at our emissions, they have an upward trend, and what we're asking for now is a huge downward trend. So they're basically saying that we should be planning this out a lot better before we start making such huge changes in emissions reduction. So they're the two teams. The debate itself, this is just a flow chart of how I imagine the teams will work. So Hannah's probably gone through some of this, but I'll just put one slide in here. So understanding the topic is important. In this presentation, I will talk a bit more about Paris Agreement and Ireland's targets. So also on Canvas, there is a page, debate 5, has a bit of information in there with some links. Also, feel free to look at any other papers or topics or articles that you think might help your debate. Once you get all these together, start brainstorming ideas individually and then come together as a team. Try and organize these ideas. Because you don't have a lot of time, it's important that you don't try and get too many in there. Just stick to a few ideas and try and debate them well. Then you have to try and structure your debate team as well. So who goes first, second, third. As I said, have some points. Also try and think about your introduction and your conclusion and have some rebuttal ready. So anticipate what the other team might be saying or might come up with and try and say why that isn't a good point. This is a debate, so yeah, try and be interactive, and yeah, some rebuttal would be good. So prepare your speeches and practice the debate. I'll set up a practice debate before, and I'll send messages around because it is obviously important to practice. Time is tight, so we will do that. So the topic itself. So Ireland needs to decarbonise at a minimum of 7% per year between now and 2030 to be consistent with the Paris Agreement. So in this presentation, I will talk about the Paris Agreement, the objective of the Paris Agreement, and how the Paris Agreement is being measured or tracked. See if we're on track. So then I'll talk a bit about Ireland and our current 2030 targets. The minimum set of 7% per year. So that essentially came from the Programme for Government Commitment this year, which said they committed to an average of 7% per year between now and 2030. So what we're saying in this debate is we need to decarbonise at a minimum of 7%. And then we look at the new 2030 targets, both from the Programme for Government and from different EU targets. So this is the title of the debate. So it's important to stick to this you can use stuff outside of this, but try not to get too lost in like the 2050 targets, or too lost with America not doing their bit. I guess we're trying to stick to this, or yeah, you can use other stuff, but we'll try and stick to the title. So the objective of the Paris Agreement is basically to limit the global warming. So the aim in the Paris Agreement is to limit to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5. Now the Paris Agreement and the articles, you can get them all online. I just took one sentence out of it, and that was, the Paris Agreement aims to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change in the context of sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. Now that could be important for this debate, but if you want to look at more, it's all online. So a quick look at what the 1.5 and 2 degrees actually means, because it doesn't sound like a lot, but in reality it actually is. So right now we're about 1 degree above pre-industrial temperatures. So going to 1.5 degrees means an increase of 0.5 degrees, and 2 degrees means an increase of 1 degree. So it's doubling the temperature increase, and you could roughly say it's almost doubling the negative impacts by increasing the temperature. So we can see in this graphic below what the 1.5 and 2 degrees actually means, and how much worse the 2 degree impact is. Now the Paris Agreement is aiming for 2 degrees, so that's our target. We're trying to get there, but you can still see it's not a great target. It's still going to have some bad effects if we do achieve it. If we don't achieve it, obviously worse. So how do we measure how well we're doing? Basically, we measure how well we're doing using a global carbon budget. So global carbon budget is the amount of carbon dioxide which can be emitted to stay within a given global warming limit. So the cumulative carbon has an almost linear relationship with the global warming. So we can then say, okay, if we emit this much carbon, then it's likely that the world will heat up this much. So because that linear relationship, we can then use a global carbon budget to say, okay, if we want to be compliant with the Paris Agreement and stay below 2 degrees, then this is what we can emit globally. So taking just an example, so say we want to limit global warming temperature to 2 degrees with a 67% probability, then we can emit 1,170 gigatons in the world, so all over. This is our global target, but the Paris Agreement hasn't actually set any global carbon budget target. It's just said 2 degrees. So we can emit 1,170, but you can see on just to the left of that, there's 250 to 2,090. That's the range. So it could be anywhere between there. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the climate feedbacks. But to put a number on it, we can emit 1,170 gigatons. And that's one part of it. But then the other part is probably the harder part. How do you share that up among all the different countries? So the Paris Agreement itself requires countries to submit a national determined contribution, which is basically their contribution towards helping limit global warming temperature. Unfortunately, what this means, well, let me explain this graph here. So we have our historical emissions per year, in the black line. The gray here represents our current trajectory, so where we're going. And this is up to the end of the century. So we can see if we keep going, we're probably going to be 4.1 to 4.8 degrees warmer than pre-industrial temperatures. With our current policies that we have, so these are the policies, not what we're actually doing, just the policies, we'll be somewhere between 2.7 and 3.1 degrees. And the pledges, which is the national determined contributions, which every country said they will do, if we achieve all that, then we'll probably get somewhere between 2.4 and 2.7 by the end of the century. And then you can see in this where we need to be, so the yellow being the 2 degrees and the green being the 1.5 degrees. So in this, you can see the 2 degrees. To be consistent with 2 degrees, we need to start reducing our emissions a lot quicker. Also, by the end of the century, it's expected we'll be somewhere between 1.6 and 1.7 degrees. That's because we start having negative emissions at the end of the century. So the world isn't actually at 2 degrees, would be a bit cooler. And that's similar with 1.5. That's why we see the 1.3 degree below it. It's because it's below that black line. So negative emissions globally is what's required. So that just give you an idea that, okay, we have the Paris Agreement, but our current national determined contributions won't actually achieve that. So looking at Europe's national determined contribution, Europe has said they will reduce greenhouse gases by 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Europe has submitted their national determined contribution on behalf of all the European countries. So Ireland being part of that. So what Europe has done, they have separated the greenhouse gases out into ETS, which is basically large emission, like power stations or large factories. So they're the ETS. So Europe manages that. The non-ETS, each country should manage that. So non-ETS would be residential sector, would be transport sector, commercial, agriculture. And there's also there's smaller power stations, smaller factories, industries. So out of the non-ETS, Ireland is responsible for reducing their greenhouse gases by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. So that's what Ireland currently has to do. And they're the targets that we were given by Europe. And Europe has said in the Paris Agreement that they will achieve that. So how Ireland aims to reduce their non-ETS greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 is all laid out in the Climate Action Plan 2019. So this is worth going through. It gives you a sense of what we need to do. But also keep in mind that Ireland, achieving the Climate Action Plan, we reduce emissions by 2 to 3% each year up to 2030. And so the Climate Action Plan 2019 only looks at up to 2030. So post 2030, Ireland's required then to reduce by 7% per year to get net zero. But the Climate Action Plan doesn't look at that, just up to 2030. So they go through, there's some detail in there, you can read through it. But just to give you a quick idea of what this 2 to 3% reduction means, it means that we need to have 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. This is a huge number. We need to have 600,000 heat pumps installed. So that's Yeah, so I think there's 400,000 heat pumps in existing dwellings. Now there's huge targets, and then we have 500,000 houses to be retrofitted up to B2. We need 70% electrical renewable energy in the electrical generation. Plant 8,000 hectares of forests per year. So this gives you an idea of what we have to do to achieve 2 to 3%. And then our debate is a minimum of 7. So what are we actually required to do to achieve that? This will hopefully give you a sense of that. I think I have a link on Canvas into the Climate Action Plan, but you can just Google it as well to find it. So the Climate Action Plan is Ireland's current 2030 targets. So the new 2030 targets will be derived from the Programme for Government Commitment, which came out earlier this year. So the average 7% per year reduction to 2030, or it also means 51% reduction over the whole decade. The European Commission also have upped their target. So we've seen earlier that we talked about the 40% reduction by 2030 compared to 1990. Now they're talking about 55% reduction. This is what's proposed right now in the European Commission. So it's not an official target yet, but I think it's very likely to be. So that will obviously then affect Ireland's current non-ETS greenhouse gas target. So what's also important is for this debate is it's not just the targets, it's just to understand where we've come from and where we are right now. So on the left-hand side, we can see our greenhouse gas emissions for 2018 and what sectors they come from, what source, sorry. So our agriculture takes up, in Ireland, this is more so than for other countries. We have a huge amount of agriculture greenhouse gas emissions. We also have a lot of heat. Our heat is pretty bad. We still use a lot of fossil fuels. Transport's also very bad. We use a lot of fossil fuels there as well. Electricity is improving, so that we expect that to come down a lot over the next decade. But we still have some serious challenges in agriculture, heat, and transport. On this right-hand side, we have a graph. So we have the Climate Action Plan in the orange, so the Climate Action Plan 2019, which I just I showed on a previous slide. And then we have the blue one, which is the Programme for Government, or the 7% per annum target. So we can see the difference in this. So from 2020 to 2030, we can see that the Programme for Government, or the 7% target, is much less. But even still, looking at the Climate Action Plan, it's a radical change from what used to be. So the last 30 years, from 1990 to 2020, we haven't really moved. We've gone up and down a bit. In fact, we're slightly up on greenhouse gas emissions. And for the next 30 years, we're required to radically decrease it all the way down to 0. That's with the Climate Action Plan. So, Programme for Government, the 7% one, it's a huge drop. So we have to question this: can we do it? Can we do it? Do we have the resources to do this? How tough will it be? How much will it cost? Will we leave anyone behind? These are questions that hopefully we can tease out in this debate. So the challenge itself, so it's about sustainable development. That was part of what was mentioned in the Paris Agreement. So we have our environmental aspect, biodiversity. Can we do this without harming nature? So the social aspect, can we do this without leaving people behind, the poor, or can we? Yeah, we need to keep everyone involved and not leave people behind. And the economic point in, can we can we still progress? Can we still develop? So can we do all these together while, even though we're not really doing them now, the question is, can we do them and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? So on the bottom here in this table, we have the Climate Action Plan, so the 2019 one that I showed, and then we have our reduction, or 7% reduction. So in the Climate Action Plan, we're required to reduce about 3% greenhouse per year, or greenhouse gases. And out of that, about 4% per year reduction in energy and about 1% reduction in agriculture. If we then move to a 7% reduction per year, our energy will be required to move about 7 to 10% per year reduction. And then our agriculture will be somewhere between 3 and 7. So because agriculture is harder to shift because there's not many available technologies, essentially it's just the herd is emitting greenhouse gases, so there's not much option except reducing herd. And I know that if you look into it, might be some other smaller options, but nothing can significantly reduce agriculture. And that's why it's harder to reduce. So that means that the energy side of things will have to take the slack. So that's why we're investing a lot in electricity. So I talked about the transport being bad. Well, what they're trying to do is trying to buy electrical vehicles because electricity is cleaner. And that's the same with the heating. So they're trying to buy heat pumps. So instead of using fossil fuels, coal, oil, trying to use the electricity because electricity is cleaner. So energy is required to move a lot more than 7% in this challenge. So some ideas for the proposition. These are just ideas, give you maybe a starting point or a few points that you can take, but essentially it's up to you, whatever you want. I'm happy to listen to any ideas, any points. So I would say explain the urgency. So Ireland declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. So we know there's an emergency happening, but what does that mean? Just try and explain that we understand this is an emergency, but what are we doing about it? Explain how we can include everyone. So have some sustainable goals. We have justice for social justice, and how we can combine social justice and climate change for climate justice. So how we can do all these together. Ireland is rich and responsible. So compared to the rest of the countries in the world, we have a lot of money per capita. We're also responsible because we have a lot of emissions per capita. So we're capable, a lot more capable than other countries. So we should essentially be leading this, not lagging behind. Other countries haven't emitted that much, and it seems a bit harsh for countries that haven't emitted much and don't have much money to be keeping up with us. We should be leading. And maybe just talk about the consequences of the failure to act right now would be good. And maybe external benefits as well of reducing right now. The opposition, on the other hand, maybe we can talk about planning and agreements required globally. So we sort of need everyone on board, and we need to have a set plan. Like America's not in the Paris Agreement right now, but they're going to be in there hopefully in a few months. We say, well, we don't even have a total proper Paris Agreement targets. And then just more about maybe just talking about the planning. Planning is essential in anything we do. So it could be argued that we haven't properly planned this out. We could talk about the risk of the social inequalities. So carbon tax, how it might affect poorer people, especially when they're trying to heat. You know, we're raising the carbon tax. So some people don't have a choice but to heat their homes via fossil fuels. They just don't have the finances to buy heat pumps. So electrical heat pumps and electrical vehicles is sort of what Ireland is aiming to. We've seen the huge ambition in it. And one of the things is, well, we'll talk about sustainable development, but is it sustainable if we just keep buying electrical vehicles and keep buying electrical heat pumps? Even is it ethically right? Because this picture below just shows some children in Congo sourcing cobalt. The cobalt is used for electrical vehicles and other batteries as well, but there's huge demand now because of electric vehicles. So that's another thing. And we can talk about maybe future technologies. I know this debate is up to 2030, but we can say maybe if we get the planning right first, and then after 2030, we might have better technologies. So we can maybe discuss that. So that's sort of it. Just to summarize, develop your team plan, work together, understand the topic and the debate. Contact me if you need. I will be on Canvas, or I'll have my email at the end of this. On Canvas. And there's also another thing, the Climate Action Amendment Bill currently being discussed in the Oireachtas. There is lots of researchers and politicians involved. There's some good debates and documents and some videos in there, which some people might find helpful. There's a lot in there, so I guess don't get too carried away, but some of it might be useful. It might help you out. It'll also give you a good understanding of what's actually happening right now in Ireland and what are the main topics. So that's it. Best of luck with it. I will be here. I'll organise the practice debate. But contact me through Canvas, or there's my email below, jason.mcguire@ucc.ie. All right, thank you.